Welcome to a special episode of Big If True. What caused misinformation mayhem in 2024? We take a look at some of the year's biggest blunders next. Well, we are throwing out our regular show format to have a little fun. Out of the endless number of stories that came across our desks this year that fit into the theme of myths and disinfo, we chose 5 that were both ridiculous and destructive. And there was one so off the charts, we needed to separate it from the pack. Our all-star roster of journalists are here to hammer it out with their hot takes. We have Kelly Boutsalis, a freelance writer and film programmer. Nicholas Hune Brown is the executive editor at The Local. Richard Warnica is a writer and editor with the Toronto Star. Takara Small is a national tech columnist with CBC. And Valerie Kendarji is a researcher at the University of Toronto. Great to have you all here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Happy to be
Okay,
here.
I want to know if there is one word that sums up this year of information. Richard.
Fear.
Fear.
Elon.
Elon.
Chaotic.
Chaotic.
Super chaotic.
Takara.
Subterfuge.
Subterfuge. Okay, that's a big one. Valerie, what do you have to say?
Fatigue.
Fatigue. So we're all feeling at this time of year. Okay, shall we count them down? Our misinformation hit list?
Please.
Let's do
Okay,
it.
let's start at number 5. Waves of misinformation surged through hurricane season in 2024. While Hurricane Helene and Milton were sowing a path of destruction, so were politicians online. Like this baseless claim from a Republican congresswoman that the government, quote, can control the weather. This kind of nonsensical talk compromised vital information around much needed aid. So much so that FEMA had to launch a rumor response page. X, formerly known as Twitter, was the super spreader of false info on Hurricane Helene. But instead of pulling down content, dozens of false posts ended up being viewed more than 160 million times. That's a lot of false info out there. Richard, I want to come to you. That is a wacky world to live in when even the weather is causing so much misinfo.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the US a lot covering the election this year, and what I was most surprised by was the extent to which, even from 4 years ago, 8 years ago, the connection to any agreed kind of truth has disappeared. And I was thinking about the hurricane one, which was, it's going on when this campaign is happening. And it illustrated for me just how disconnected from any kind of trusted news source or information source, not just the fringe anymore, not just your aunt on her Facebook page on the farm who hasn't seen anyone in 2 weeks.
Right.
It's everybody. It is the mainstream now, relies on their phone, they're picking up their phone, something dangerous happens, something scary happens, they're getting fed a constant loop of virality, of craziness.
Yeah.
And the more scared you are, the more danger it is, the more the algorithms play on that. The more you're hearing that from Marjorie Taylor Greene that the government can control the weather, that FEMA is going to seize people's houses, that this is all. The craziest one and the scariest one was that all of this was a plot by the government to seize land, to create more lithium mines, to power electric cars.
It comes back to that word fear.
Fear,
that
absolutely.
you talked
People are
about.
scared.
People are scared. Takara, you're a tech journalist, so I'm sure you were watching this fly online.
I was. And I think, again, picking up on the fear comment, I think people are seeing in real time how climate is changing, the effects of that financially specifically, and they're looking for answers, specifically something that will tell them how they can avert this. Climate change is going to be a decade-long, a lifelong issue for us. If this has to do with a government that's, somehow controlling the weather, that is something that human beings can understand and they feel they have some type of control over. And online, you saw that fear. It was very apparent. And honestly, what was interesting is this extended beyond the US. and beyond Canada. There are countries around the world, I'm sure people know about what happened in Madrid and Valencia recently, who also are feeling the same emotions and looking for the same answers, whether they're correct or not.
You know, Kelly, when you think of climate deniers, you know, it's one thing if they're sitting on the outside and just, you know, trying to make misinformation a thing and it's slowly advancing towards us. But this misinformation was happening in real time. So, I mean, you look at first responders, you look at people that actually need help getting the wrong information. How dangerous is something like that?
It's incredibly dangerous. And I keep coming back to the fact that we think that there's some big overlord controlling nature. Like, how did we get here? And it is impacting people's lives.
It was impacting so many people's lives. Okay, folks, there's so much to say on that, but I want to take us to number 4. TikTokers tried to take the place of dermatologists in 2024. What's that all about? Let's take a listen.
Sunscreen is a scam, and here's why.
Stop wearing sunscreen because it's terrible for your skin.
This burning issue spread like wildfire online over chemical concerns. This relates to 2 small studies published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which found that 6 chemicals, including oxybenzone, could be absorbed into your blood and warranted further study. But here's what many TikTokers missed. Scientists stressed that individuals should still use sunscreen to prevent skin cancer.
Oh, the sunscreen. Valerie, let me come to you. What went through your mind when you saw this one?
This was an interesting one. So digital platforms do have the potential to empower users with health-related information, especially in provinces like Quebec, where healthcare is so poorly managed. It would be great to have a doctor that has the bandwidth to give you a holistic approach to your health and take the time, but they don't have the bandwidth. And so you can blame individuals against this backdrop to seek to empower themselves with health-related information, and social media can be a good place to do so. You can learn, cool nutritional facts. You can learn interesting recipes to boost, your protein intake, for example. And some advice is innocuous. It can't really do any harm. A wellness influencer claiming you need 80 grams of protein and you trying that out likely isn't going to do much harm. But the danger is when you have claims that are likely to harm your short or long-term health. And it's overwhelming to sift through all of this information. You never really know an influencer's credentials or intentions. Do they want to provide this information as a public good, or do they want to, boost their engagement statistics? Is it both?
Are they getting
is it
paid?
a legitimate Exactly. Is it a legitimate surgeon, working at a hospital but also is social media savvy, or is it a wellness influencer with absolutely no credentials?
Nicholas, I had people in my life, younger people, that were actually asking or saying, I don't want to wear sunscreen because it causes cancer. I'm like, oh my goodness, like the opposite effect was happening.
Yeah, I mean, there's something so powerful just going on your phone and seeing a guy in a doctor's uniform and they're explaining things. And I think the wellness industry in particular, it's like, in what we're able to know through trusted sources. Like, it makes sense to be skeptical of giant drug industries. It makes sense to be skeptical of, even the medical system that, as Valerie was saying, doesn't have enough time to talk about wellness with patients. So into that gap, you can get a lot of weirdos on the internet who are selling you all sorts of stuff.
TikTok sensations.
Yeah.
Takara, on your end, what are you telling young people? Because you are dealing with tech, you are dealing with the TikTokers of the world. What are you telling them in terms of how they consume information?
I mean, this particular topic, it was quite meaningful for me, just simply because you saw this, this trend go far and wide. And as someone who's Black, there is this misconception that if you're Black or you're of dark skinned, you don't need sunscreen as well because you won't get skin cancer, which is completely false. Trends like this, I really think, amplify how online harm can lead to offline harm at the same time. Like, this is something that can lead to long-term medical disabilities. When I see stuff like this, I always tell people they have to do their own research. They have to dig into an individual's credentials, as was mentioned, but also dig into what other experts who've studied this for a very long time are saying as well. You would never take the advice of a random stranger when it comes to, your child or a loved one, but yourself, people are more keen to gamble.
Right. By the way, Health Canada says, wear sunscreen. Let's all lather up, okay? Let's go to number 3. There was a massive misinformation fist fight in the boxing ring at the Olympics this year.
Algerian boxer Iman Khalif made global headlines after her intense knockout raised unfounded concerns about her gender. Famed author J.K. Rowling made the falsehood worse, accusing the Olympics of allowing a male to get in the ring with a female. But the IOC doubled down on the truth.
Born female, was registered female, lived her life as a female, boxed as a female, has a female passport. This is not a transgender case.
However, the discredited International Boxing Association, which has ties to the Kremlin, claims it has 2 tests that prove otherwise, but won't reveal which tests, the exact results, or how the organization reached its conclusions.
So this ignited culture wars around the world, literally in countries around the world. Kelly, you were watching this one. What stood out to you?
Well, I think that there's also, this one is such a big story with such a big nuanced elements behind it, including how Imani, the boxer, defeated a Russian boxer in the IBO, the discredited organization, and that's how she kind of became kicked out of that. But anyways, yeah, what stood out for me is that the anti-trans agenda was immediately picked up, and J.K. Rowling, Elon Musk, J.D. Vance blamed Kamala Harris for creating an environment for this. In the Olympics. None of it made sense, and it was so incredibly harmful and pointedly put on a woman of color. Every time this is happening in the athletic world, it is Caster Semenya, Serena Williams, dark-skinned women this happens to, and it can ruin a career. She went into this Olympics being the first Algerian woman to to be a boxer in the Olympics, and the story is completely derailed from that.
Yeah, the moment, but she still medaled, and that was amazing. The moment was in many ways taken away. Richard, some of that infighting was happening in the U.S. You cover that, right? And did this story come across your desk?
Yeah, it did, and I know this is a lighthearted conversation, but this story, it makes me so mad, and the extent to which trans people and trans issues became the punching bag, the default culture war punching bag of the right-wing American political ecosystem this year is terrifying, and it's infuriating. I probably went to a dozen big Donald Trump rallies this year. Every single time, the biggest applause lines would be when he would say something about getting men out of women's sports or getting men out of women's washrooms, and the extent to which they have turned the lives of vulnerable people, the lives of people whose gender just happens not to be the same as theirs, into a punching bag because they know it does well virally. It's terrifying and it's infuriating. I mean, it was the number of moments I had this year where looking at this stuff, and people are going to die. The boxer, you mentioned her career is going to be damaged. Her life was so deeply affected by this. And how many other people are watching that who, maybe look a little more masculine than most women and are saying now, is this about me?
Right, am I going to be a target?
Yeah. So instead of watching someone and saying, oh my God, that person who looks like me is kicking butt in the Olympics, they're saying, if I step out, I'm gonna get hate. It's terrible.
Valerie, what were you thinking of during those Olympics?
2 main things. What are our responsibilities as internet users? Why is it that decency, empathy, politeness go out the window when we're behind a screen? Why is it that you abide by certain social norms and rules when you engage with people in person, and we feel differently about that when we're in front of a screen? Second is this very difficult development in our digital era, that the immediacy of information and news stories make us feel like we need to have an opinion about everything, always, and right away. We don't take the time to get the facts, to wait for the story to come through. We feel like we need to be on a side right away. That, for me, is a very concerning development.
Yeah, I think that's just good advice to all of us to take a breather, calm down before we go to post or react to something, and just settle ourselves and maybe look up a few more sources. Okay, very important conversation, but I do want to turn our attention to number 2. There is a lot of talk in Canada about our housing crisis, but who is to blame?
An easy target? Newcomers to Canada. Politicians from both sides of the aisle have alluded to increased migration as a major factor. Now, the government has decided to slow population growth, scaling back future immigration targets and reducing the number of international students. Meanwhile, anti-immigrant sentiment is growing. The majority of Canadians now believe there are too many immigrants entering the country.
All right, Nicholas, I'm coming to you because I know the team at The Local does a lot of work on this.
Yeah.
What's your take when you hear people in the streets saying, well, it's the newcomers' fault?
Yeah. Well, immigration and housing, not like quite as clear cut as, sunscreen is bad for you.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I'd call it misinformation, but I'd say that it's a simplistic analysis, and what's been remarkable is how quickly that analysis has kind of spread to just become common wisdom, people on both sides of the aisle. And the agreement is that, that more immigration means housing goes up. We know the housing crisis wasn't caused by immigrants because the housing crisis existed well before this recent uptick in immigration, right? We know it's more complicated than that because in small towns where there's not a lot of immigration, from Moncton to Saskatoon, rents have gone up, regardless of the number of people coming in. So when we talk about the housing crisis, it gets incredibly complicated. You can talk about 50 years of not building any social housing. You can talk about sexy subjects like zoning and all these things that kind of interact to put us in the position we're in today. Less easy, less convenient than to just say that it's because people are coming in from outside the country and taking their homes.
And in the 80s and 90s in Canada, I mean, there is a concerted effort to change the way we look at housing. Is that fair?
Well, we definitely stopped building social housing at that time. And you do see sort of, I guess, in rental, especially increased financialization. In places like Toronto, I think you can talk about individual renters who are feeling the effects of giant corporate landlords that have become very efficient at extracting the most rent as possible. So the housing crisis is so complicated. As you're talking about first-time home buyers and you're talking about rent. To pin all that stuff on kind of recent immigrants is, I think, problematic.
I think another part of that conversation is that foreign buyers are often blamed, and you see, the federal government putting in a foreign buyers ban. But when you look at the numbers, it's actually only 2 to 6% of properties owned in Canada and different places in the country that are foreign bought. So it sounds really good on the surface. Yeah, ban the foreign buyers, but is that really part of the problem? Does that create, I guess, those types of policies create even more fodder over that, Richard?
I think it's really complicated. I think that. I think like Nick, I don't think I would call this misinformation in the classic way we would think of it. It's not like sunscreen causing cancer.
But yet people talking to me in the streets and
Totally.
on Twitter will probably bring this up the most.
100%. I think it's an easy scapegoat. I think that our economy doesn't function without high immigration levels. We don't have population level replacement by people in Canada having kids.
Construction industry doesn't work. You're not going to get more houses without more immigrants.
But I do think that there are sectors in which we've got a college and university system in Ontario that has been taking gross advantage of international students. We don't want to pay for our own system, so we brought them in tremendous numbers, and in many cases exploited them, made them pay far more than they can afford. And in certain communities, that has really affected the rental market. But that's not their fault. It's not the students' fault. It's the people who made the policies' fault. They're the ones who are causing that, not the foreign students, not the immigrants, not temporary foreign workers.
It's a wider conversation. And when I think of my own history in this country, I'm like, we're all immigrants unless you're Indigenous to this country, Canada. Right? The rest of us are part of the immigrant pool here, let's be honest. Okay, let's turn our attention to number 1 on our misinformation hit list. A slew of racist posts sparked massive riots right across the United Kingdom.
It all started after a fatal stabbing at a children's dance class. A few ignorant posts first blamed an illegal migrant, then a Muslim man for the killings. The perpetrator was neither. These allegations were quickly debunked, but the match was already lit. Far-right propaganda on social media further fueled angry protesters in a country already tense over immigration.
Valerie, let me come to you. What does this do to racialized communities?
I think the most important element of this story is the actual focus. So instead of focusing on the atrocity of these children being killed and injured, the focus was on the characteristic of the suspect, migrant or not migrant. But even if this person had been an asylum seeker or recent migrant, it doesn't it still doesn't lend credence to these racist narratives or justify the riots or justify the violence, because the actions of one individual don't represent the group as a whole. And this is a bigger issue we're experiencing today. So we're putting individuals into buckets. We're labeling them with these neat labels we've been provided, like woke, alt-right, migrant. As a result, our interpersonal trust in each other is dwindling, because social media platforms are giving us such an extremely distorted perception of each other. And we saw with these riots how it can actually cause real world harm, how these digital information flows can pour out into the real world.
I mean, it others people, right? We other each other, and then we create barriers. Kelly, you brought up Elon, and Elon weighed into this one.
He sure did.
Do you remember what he spurred on there?
Well, he brought in the LinkedIn post, which was the original source of I am a father whose daughter was at this dance class who actually hadn't been to it. And then he was the one who started posting about it and furthering the Civil War idea and stoking tensions that were already there.
Such a serious story, and all of this came out of it. And you're right, I think Valerie pointed out that point, like, children died, and that was the focus, and so much of this got misconstrued. That is our top five, but we do have a bonus, okay? The highest voted, most ridiculous misinformation story of the year, and it was spread by who else?
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Oh boy, that was President-elect now, Donald Trump, unfairly targeting Haitian Americans. I mean, we can all kind of laugh at that, but when you really think that there's people behind those words, it is just so, it's distasteful, to say the least. Takara, let me come to you on what was going through your mind as you were watching the debate.
I mean, I think after the debate, I was a little bit surprised at how quickly this turned into a song, how content creators turned this into a dance remix. But I will say this really emphasized how there's no such thing as a local story anymore. I saw, people from around the world weighing in on this topic, this subject matter, knowing very little about U.S. politics at all. And from there, it seemed to just grow. And again, you had individuals who had very specific agendas, who were stoking fires, but could not vote in the U.S. election, were unaware of the issues taking place, and especially of the Haitian community in that town, which honestly was playing a key role in revitalizing the town. So from my perspective, it really hit home as a tech journalist how every single story, no matter where it happens in the world, you really have to have reporters who are on the misinformation beat, and how it can easily grow beyond the borders.
Yeah, and that was debunked in real time by the journalist, and yet online you just saw people questioning. It's nuts. Nicholas?
I mean, it had to be a Donald Trump quote for the final one, right? Like, does this show exist if Donald Trump had never entered the world stage? Would we be talking about misinformation and disinformation in the same way? It's, this is the most watched political event of the year. He's saying stuff that has worked its way through the information system from, in weird ways, to be spoken by, the Republican candidate for president to everyone. I don't know if people have figured out still what to do when the most powerful man in the world says things that are untrue and inflammatory. And, we've invented all these different ways of categorizing them. Is it misinformation? Is it disinformation? But
everyone chuckled in the room as soon as that came on. I mean, Kelly, what do you take away from that?
The catchy song, honestly.
Okay, you are cueing me perfectly, okay? When the real world is untruthful, at least the internet is doing the most with it, right? Okay, glorious memes, hilarious parodies, and yes, even music. We will leave all of you on a smiling note with a remix of Eating the Cats and Dogs. Thank you for the laugh. Thank you all for being here. It's been so fun.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm Molly Thomas. Have a great holiday season, folks. We'll see you back here for a new episode, January 19th.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. Eat the cat.